Musicals. People love them. Even if they don't, they do. The musical fandom is vast and wide, and just like any other fandom, is also insanely toxic and will oust anyone who dares to hold a different opinion than them. And as a musical fan myself, I'm here now to self-immolate myself and share my most controversial musical opinions. Hello everybody, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Sid Says. It's called that because I'm Sid, and I'm saying things to you. Some of my favorite things are musicals and sharing opinions that no one asked for. I'm also known to hold opinions on musicals that I'm honestly surprised to learn are not widely held. I don't want to shock anyone right off the bat, so I'm going to start with my least controversial opinions and slowly ramp up to my more controversial ones, like putting a frog in a pot of water and slowly turning up the heat. By the time we're boiling, you won't even notice. And we can all laugh about this later. We'll laugh later. Okay, this is an ice cold take, I know. Most musical fans, especially purists, will agree that seeing a musical on stage is far superior to any film. But I think I'm gonna have some on here that I'll get angry comments about for sure. So let's look at some of the most famous movie musical adaptations, or at least the ones I have opinions about. Let's start with the ones I actually like. Jesus Christ Superstar, Chicago, and Little Shop are all great. Don't get me wrong, I still like the stage shows better because the movies cut out some songs. I get it. Sometimes they have to for time or logistical reasons, but still, it makes me sad. Rocky Horror I love, and I actually love it so much that I haven't even listened to the stage version yet. Yes, I know, that's practically sacrilegious, but I just keep forgetting to do it. I'll get around to it eventually, I'm sure. But now that we've covered the very short list of movie musical adaptations that I actually thought were good, let's talk about all the stinkers. Into the Woods. I don't think there's a soul on earth who will disagree with me on this one. This one is such garbage. Disney really does suck the life out of every project these days, don't it? All the whimsy and magic and even the original point of this musical are just completely missing from the movie. Not to mention, they cut some of the most important aspects of the musical, like there isn't a narrator character, which means there's no fourth wall breaking. The baker's father has been completely cut from the story, which means one of the central themes from the original musical is missing. And worst of all, they cut the song No More, which is also a central through line with the major themes from the original musical. But you know what? Maybe I can forgive that last one because if they hadn't cut that song, we would have been subjected to a James Corden solo. And speaking of James Corden, horrible casting decision. When will he be stopped? But other than him, I also thought the rest of the cast wasn't great. Like, no one other than James was abysmally horrible, but they were clearly going for star power over who would have been actually great in these roles. Like, at most, they were fine, not good, not great, just fine, but the movie was pure ass. Les Mis. I feel like when this one first came out, everyone was slobbering all over its nuts so hard that I felt scared to say I didn't like it. But there's since been a renaissance with this film, with everyone rightfully clowning on it, so I feel like my opinion is pretty widely held now. You know how it's a common trope in movie musicals that they'll cast ultra famous people over actually talented people? I feel like the Les Mis movie is the whole embodiment of that trope. Holy God. Not a single fucking person could sing in this film. Even the people who I know for a fact can sing, like Anne Hathaway, sounded like garbage. But most egregiously, who is responsible for casting Russell Crowe? Holy hell, dude. They should get the guillotine. But this whole film was such a dumpster fire of an adaptation. The camera work is egregious, the acting choices were baffling, the singing was god awful. I legit wanted to kill myself while watching it. The producers. This one really hurts my heart because it should have, by all means, been good. Most of the original cast from the stage version reprised their roles for the movie, and the actors were very experienced in both stage and screen. Everyone could sing with the exception of the stunt casting of Uma Thurman, and the script was left exactly the same. But something happened between stage and screen that just got so fucked up somehow. Honestly, I think its downfall was that it was too much like the stage version, down to the performances, and stage stage performances don't really translate well to screen performances. It honestly gave me the ick so bad at certain points, but honestly, I feel like this one is lesser known, so if you haven't heard of it, it's great. It's based on the Mel Brooks film of the same name. You should check out both, but maybe skip the film adaptation of the musical. The Wiz. I know this one has since become a cult classic, and it was most people's first introduction to this musical, and I can respect that and respect the nostalgia factor. But this movie is so bad. The guy who adapted the script for the film didn't even bother to know anything about the musical beforehand. He had literally never seen it before. Not to mention, he completely changed the setting. Like, it still takes place in Oz, but Oz has been updated to be like a weird version of New York City. And in another weird change, Dorothy also lives in New York City, which completely destroys the whole point of Oz being very different from her home. They aren't different anymore. Oz is just a slightly weirder, fucked up version of New York. They also updated Dorothy's character so that she's no longer a child coming of age, but already a grown adult, once again completely disregarding the coming of age element of the story. And this change isn't entirely the writer's fault because Diana Ross basically forced herself into the role of Dorothy even though she was 33 years old at the time of filming. So they had to update the character to be older because Diana would have been looking like a high schooler from Greece if they tried to tell us she was 17. Anyway, the last thing I want to complain about in this one, other than its fever dream added plot elements, is the singing. Holy shit, when did that get so low? Everyone in this cast could sing, and they could all sing really well, with the exception of Richard Pryor, who could not sing at all, so they had to cut all the Wizard's songs. Rip. But other than him, everyone could sing. However, when they all tried to sing together, yeah, I'm not sure I've ever heard a worse four-part harmony. That was grating. Okay, now we're getting into slightly controversial territory with Sweeney Todd. I think this one is one of the worst fucking movie musical adaptations I've ever seen. But somehow, I've met so many people who will go to absolute bat for this one. They will fight tooth and nail to convince me it's good, but it sucks so much ass. First of all, yet another example of a movie musical where fucking no one can sing. And it's also yet another example of the director completely missing the point of a Stephen Sondheim musical. But honestly, that's not really such a surprise with this one. Little Tim victim mentality Burton directed this one and decided to kin Sweeney instead of viewing him as a cautionary tale. He's like the goth poser version of the guys who idolize Patrick Bateman. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a director miss the point so hard. Like, did you know Tim wanted to change the story so that Mrs. Lovett was a sex worker? How do you miss the point so bad? Not to mention, Tim has such an obsession with casting the same fucking people over and over again that Sweeney and Mrs. Lovett were played by actors who were way younger than the characters should have been. But what does that matter, right? Since he wanted to sexualize Miss Lovett so bad. Not to mention, he took this musical far too seriously and practically sapped all the humor from it. I swear, I never understand why anyone thinks Tim has any talent as a director. The most this film has going for it is that the aesthetic is really good, but honestly, it's the equivalent of slapping a bunch of frosting on a plate and calling it a cake. It's ass. Oh yeah, we're getting into hotter water now, aren't we? Now this one I know for a fact people are gonna get mad at me for, especially the Broadway purists. But in my opinion, there are many musicals that are much better after they've been revived and updated. But don't worry, the title of this chapter is a little clickbaity because I don't think this is true for every musical. For example, I think the original cast recordings for both The Mystery of Edwin Drood and Into the Woods are much better than their revival cast recordings. There are also some that I'm teetering on the edge for, like Little Shop. I generally prefer the most recent revival version. However, I much prefer Ellen Greene as Audrey from the original cast recording rather than Tammy Blanchard from the 2022 cast recording. And I will forever think Rick Moranis was the best Seymour, even though he's from the movie. And here's a take I don't think anyone will disagree with me on. All Golden Age musicals that previously had problematic shit in it, like casual racism or sexism, that have since been updated in their revivals to remove those aspects, are much better than their originals. Try to disagree with me on that, I dare you. Okay, but let's get into my real hot takes. First, I think the most recent revival of Sweeney Todd is better than the original. Hold on. Quiet! Let me explain. I, by no means, think the original cast recording is bad. I think the revival is, for the most part, better. Josh Groban does an absolutely incredible job as Sweeney, and I appreciate that they cast younger, or at least younger looking people as Joanna, Anthony, and Toby, because the original cast was pretty anyway, but I just overall enjoy the performances in this one much more. With a pretty big exception. Annalee Ashford didn't do a horrible job or anything, but she is nowhere near Angela Lansbury's level. Angela will always be the one true Mrs. Lovett for me. No one else will compare. Okay, here's the next one. The revival of The Wiz is better. Wait, please! Hear me out. The musical is of such huge historical importance to African American art that I know it's heresy to say I like the revival more than the original, especially since the original cast recording is preserved in the Library of Congress due to its cultural impact. But what can I say? The revival slaps so much harder. I also love that they added back in the song You Can't Win. Once again, I know some people are going to be mad about this, but I love that song way more than the Scarecrow's original song, I Was Born the Day After Yesterday. And I know people are upset that they removed the original Tornado ballet sequence, but the updated arrangement of the tornado just slaps so hard. I can't help but disagree. I love it so much. Not to mention, I know some people hate overly embellished vocal runs or gymnastics, but I fucking love them. And this revival is chock full of them. I'm living. But here's something that I think the revival did so wrong, and I'll absolutely never forgive them for. They took the absolutely gorgeous and culturally relevant costumes from the original and made them look like this. Like this is... Ugh. Oh, please. Give us the original costumes back. I do think the revival wizard slayed, though. He's the only one. Everyone else looks like trash. Oh, did you think I forgot to talk about this one in my first section? No. This shit is so ass it deserves its own dedicated chapter. Now, I know people who saw the stage version first will agree with me on this one, but for the other half of people who saw the movie first, they will fight you to the death trying to say this movie is actually good. And it's not good. It's the worst piece of dumpster fire garbage I've ever seen. Jesus Christ. Where do I even start? Perhaps the casting. Once again, a movie musical where they prioritize star power and aesthetic over actual talent. No one in this goddamn musical can sing. The only person I'm gonna cut some slack for is Emmy Rossum. She was only 16 to 17 during filming, so it's not her fault she doesn't sound great. She was a literal child trying to sing one of the most demanding and difficult roles ever conceived for musical theater. But then there's Minnie Driver, who played Carlotta, and she sounded great, right? Wrong, because she wasn't the one singing. They hired a professional opera singer to sing her part, and Minnie lip-synced it. And what's even weirder is that Minnie can sing, but she's an alto. Why did they make this casting decision? Next are Andre and Furman, who not only can't sing, but are reduced to nothing more than bumbling idiots who are supposed to be comedic relief, but are never once funny. Patrick Wilson as Raoul is fucking abysmal, both in sound and visual. What the fuck is that hair? But honestly, I think he's one of the better singers in the cast, which is really saying something. But nothing will compare to the absolute ear-flaying tones of Gerard Butler's Phantom.
Let your soul take you where you long to be.
What the fuck was anyone thinking when they cast him? And you want to know the most sick and twisted part about all this? Ramin Karimloo, the man who I, and many others, consider to be the best Phantom performer to ever grace the stage, was in this movie, but was given a non-singing cameo role of Christine's father. Why do bad things happen to good people? But the singing is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this film's sins. Let's talk acting next. I know for a fact that every actor in this film is a good actor. I've seen them in other films and they do great. But in this film, not so much. And I think it comes down to the directing choices. For whatever reason, the director, Joel Schumacher, who has never made a good film in his life, went for like this weird, trying to be intentionally camp, but falling completely flat on its face feel. Like the choices made are so bad that it doesn't even come back around to being unintentionally camp. It's just bad. All the actors behave like cartoon characters. It's just such a weird choice for an adaptation of a gothic horror musical of all things. There are certainly moments of levity in the original stage show and even the original novel, but this feels like a clown car pileup in the worst way possible. The only characters who are played straight are Christine, Raoul, and the Phantom, but even they have been butchered. Christine has always had this kind of waifish, passive protagonist feel who simply exists to be tortured and saved, but I've seen many different performances where, without actually changing anything about the script, the actresses make Christine feel more opinionated, strong willed, and active as a character. But based on Emmy's performance, I can only assume that Joel directed her to act like a sexy plank of wood. She hardly ever shows emotion, and when she does, they're subdued so that she can still be pretty. Christine isn't allowed to have multitudes. She isn't allowed to have a personality or wants of her own. She's meant to be the ultimate male fantasy, and that's disgusting. Moving on to Raoul, he's fine, I guess, but he's fucking boring as hell. Like, don't get me wrong, he's pretty mid in the original musical too, but at the very least, I can actually believe he loved Christine. Movie Raoul feels like he got a lobotomy. And last and least, we have the Phantom. Oh, Gerard. Jardy B. Honestly, I don't think he did that bad a job considering what he was working with, but what he was working with was hot, liquid shit. And worse than the acting, I think they got the characterization of the Phantom completely wrong. The Phantom is supposed to be a man who was ousted from society. He's supposed to have weak social skills and rely on trickery rather than charm or pure strength. But in the film, he's a macho, sexy man who's showing off any chance he gets and beating people up with his big muscles and superior sword fighting skills. Like, are we for real? Bitch is supposed to be an incel nerd. Like, let's get a grip now. And speaking of the whole sexy Phantom thing, let's discuss something else the movie gets wrong. Visuals. Honestly, I think the set is fine for the most part, with the exception of those fucking arm candles. I know it's a reference to the old Beauty and the Beast film, but I don't care. It's stupid. And making Beauty and the Beast parallels to this story is fucking illiteracy at its finest. There's also the horse. The fuck is up with that? I also know that this is a reference to the book, but it didn't make sense then and it doesn't make sense now. And then there's the camera, wholly out of focus Batman. They were definitely trying to go for an aesthetic thing here, but it just looks like they need to wipe off the lens or I need to get a stronger prescription. Let's talk costumes and specifically past the point of no return. This costume does nothing to conceal the fact that this is the Phantom, and by doing that, it makes no sense for any of the characters to react the way they do. Christine should be terrified, but she's like, into it? Why? The guard should be shooting him, but they aren't, and Raoul just sits there and lets this all fucking happen. It's so stupid. But the one that really pissed me off was the masquerade outfits. Why the fuck did they make everything monochrome? Not only is it less visually interesting, but it directly contradicts the lyrics to the song.
Splash of mode, splash of puce, fool and king, cool and goose, green and black, queen and priest, trace of rouge, trace of beast.
What color? There is no color. And look what they did to my poor boy's Red Death outfit. They de-yassified the fuck out of him. Overall, the costumes in this film are extremely lackluster, which is so stupid, considering they just could have kept the iconic costumes from the show. But they decided to go with the ugliest and least historically accurate, poorly constructed, and oftentimes far too revealing for a child to be wearing costumes. Which leads me to my last and most vomit-inducing point, the sexualization of an underaged Emmy Rossum. I briefly touched on this earlier, but Christine is by far more sexualized in this film in comparison to the stage play. In fact, you could make the argument that she's not sexualized at all in the stage version, but in the film, lines have been added, camera shots have been crafted, and costumes were made to specifically reveal and make comments on Christine's body. And this is made even more disgusting by the fact that, like I mentioned earlier, Emmy was only 16 to 17 during filming. She was literally cast as the sexy female lead, sexualized on camera, and made to kiss not one, but two grown-ass men, while everyone on set knew that she was a minor. Fucking despicable. Literally, shame on everyone who allowed and enabled this to happen, and honestly, shame on you if you defend this aspect of the film. Unfortunately, I have seen some people defend this decision by saying that Christine was 15 in the book, but not only does that not excuse sexualizing a real-life child, but it also isn't even true. It's a translation error, and while her real age is never explicitly said in the book, it's pretty heavily implied that she's at the very least 21. So even a French man from the early 20th century had more sense than you if you defend this casting decision. Alright, I'm done with this chapter. Or am I? Because I have an even more controversial Phantom of the Opera opinion.
You need to leave!
Oh yeah, I'm gonna get some hate for this one for sure. I mean, how could I say this, right? The original cast was amazing. Wrong. They were mid as hell. Sarah Brightman, she only got the role because she was Andrew's Nepo wife. Her voice is honestly pretty weak and she plays Christine like a hypnotized marionette. Well, what about Michael Crawford, I hear you ask? He's a legend. He sings like an angel. Wrong. Michael Crawford is fine, I guess, but have you heard Ramin Karimloo as the Phantom? Ramin makes Michael sound like a high school jock who was only cast as the musical lead because no other boys auditioned. Like, are you seriously gonna tell me this?
The Phantom of the Opera is there inside your mind.
Sounds better than this?
The Phantom of the Opera is there inside your mind.
Be so for real. But what about the rest of the cast? Raoul? Mid. Carlotta? Mid. Madame Giry? Mid. The entire original ensemble, staging and directing? Mid. The best parts were the sets and the costumes. Those slapped, which is why they're still used today. The honest truth is that the original cast set the template, but since that original cast, there have been far more impressive performances many times over. Performances that have completely blown the original out of the water. Sure, the original was good, that's why it stayed on Broadway for so long, but quality of the later cast's growing in talent was what made it the longest running show on Broadway. So in conclusion, the original was mid in comparison. Congratulations on making it halfway through my unbearable opinions, but before we go any further, we must first hear from this video's sponsor. Me. That's right, me. Because who else is going to tell you the most abysmal musical opinions you've ever heard? And I hear if you subscribe to my channel, you too can share your most controversial opinions in the comments, and I will delete any hate comments left in reply. So if you too want to avoid taking any accountability for your terrible opinions, please give me a like and subscribe, and go check out my various social medias linked in the description below. Thank you. And back to the video. Uh-oh. All the high school girlies and 40-year-old gays are gonna be mad at me for this one. Don't get me wrong, I loved Heathers when I was in high school too. We all go through phases. No, but seriously, I don't think Heathers is necessarily a bad musical, but like the title says, I think it's a bad adaptation and completely misses the point of the movie it's based on. And I think what it really boils down to is tone. Heathers the movie is a black comedy that satirizes the public response to teen suicide, depression, and bullying. Heathers the musical does the same thing, but I think its ultimate downfall is that it takes itself too seriously. And I know that might sound contradictory at first, like the musical handles some pretty heavy subject matter. Shouldn't it take itself seriously? And the answer is actually no, because it's satire. It's supposed to be making a commentary by the fact that no one is taking these very serious topics very seriously. And the musical nails this tone sometimes, but other times chooses to play it more straight. But by doing this, they're hurting their own message. Let's look at some examples. The first one that comes to mind is the rumor Kurt and Ram spread about the two of them sleeping with Veronica. In the film, Veronica hears this rumor and is grossed out by it, but doesn't really take take it too seriously, especially since no one really believes them anyway. This is something they do all the time. And this is where the satire lies, because this is a very serious thing they're doing. If this was real life, spreading this kind of rumor could have really serious consequences. But the fact that no one reacts to it in the way they should is the commentary. They're commentating on the apathy of teenagers, how they're so immature they don't even realize the consequences of their own actions. Heathers the musical, on the other hand, decides to handle this story element differently. When Kurt and Ram spread this rumor, Veronica is humiliated and devastated. She reacts in a more realistic way, and on the surface, this might not seem like such a big change, but by having this realistic reaction, it undermines all the satirical elements we've seen up until this point. The tone of the musical becomes confused. What's the commentary now? Because earlier in the musical, Veronica and JD literally kill a girl and stage it to look like a suicide so they don't get in trouble, and this is all played for laughs. But suddenly, we're introduced to a similarly dark topic, and suddenly, we're taking it seriously? I ask again, what's the commentary now? What is the musical trying to say? Because it's no longer making a commentary on teenage apathy. So what's the message? And this scene becomes doubly confusing when you factor in that earlier in the musical, Kurt and Ram sexually harass Veronica, and this is also played for laughs. If the musical kept a consistent tone and dedicated itself to satire, this scene would still work and be funny. But since they just suddenly decided to take sexual assault seriously out of nowhere, the message becomes confused. Is this serious or is this satire? And this confused tone continues at multiple points throughout the musical. It happens during Lifeboat, during Shine a Light Reprise, during Kindergarten Boyfriend, during Yo Girl, and sometimes the whiplash of tone between scenes and songs is enough to make me dizzy. And the thing is, Heathers the movie also has more serious moments, but they feel far more earned and integrated into the plot. For example, the two more serious scenes in the film that come to mind are this. Veronica and JD go to the funeral of Kurt and Ram after they murder them and stage it to look like a gay suicide pact and start laughing after Ram's dad says this.
I love my dead gay son.
But the serious moment happens when a little girl looks back at Veronica when she hears her laugh, and she has tears in her eyes. And Veronica stops laughing because for the first time, she realizes how serious this is. This isn't a game. This is real life. And Kurt and Ram may have been jerks, but they were real people with real lives and with people who loved them. And it's such a brief moment, but it's so impactful. The second moment is both serious but deeply relevant to central themes of the film. The entire time all the popular kids have been seemingly committing suicide, the rest of the school has been preaching how important it is to recognize everyone and be anti-bullying. But at the same time, this one girl, Martha, is still being bullied and ignored by everyone around her, and it finally reaches a point where she tries to commit suicide by walking into traffic. She luckily doesn't die, but this just prompts more bullying from her peers, including one of Veronica's friends, once again prompting Veronica to realize how serious this whole situation is, and that it's nothing to be laughing about. And by the end of the film, Veronica befriends Martha, showing us that she's changed and grown as a person, and she's no longer that apathetic teenager from the beginning. And speaking of Martha, let's talk about how she was adapted for the musical. Instead of having Martha be a semi-background character who is passively bullied by Veronica like in the film, the musical upgrades Martha's role to being Veronica's best friend since infancy. And I think this is one of the worst changes they could have made, because it also upgrades Veronica's character from being apathetic to being downright evil. Because in the musical, she doesn't just bully a girl to remain on the Heather's good side, she's going out of her way to bully her lifelong best friend so that she can be popular. And not just bully her, but publicly humiliate her and abandon her to the point that she tries to kill herself. That isn't apathy. That is psychopath behavior. And then we're just supposed to forgive Veronica at the end? Oh, and that just makes me remember another thing they changed. Heather Duke. Heather Duke was kind of the underdog of the Heathers until the head Heather dies. It's heavily implied that Heather Duke struggled with mental illness, and it's confirmed that she was bullied by the head Heather, and even suffered from an eating disorder. This element is present in both the film and the musical musical, however, it's more prominent in the film, but JD basically grooms Heather Duke to become the new head Heather and encourages her to become just as awful as she was. At the end of the film, Veronica acknowledges that Heather Duke is only the way she is because of all these factors, and tells her she believes she can become a better person someday. But at the end of the musical, Heather Duke is demonized and basically shunned by the school for her crimes. And just what? Because Veronica was also a huge bitch who literally bullied her best friend so bad that she tried to kill herself. But that's forgivable, and what Heather Duke did isn't. And then on top of that, the message of this story is supposed to be to not bully, and then they end the show with bullying Heather Duke? Like, make that make sense. I know there are multiple different versions of the show that try to fix these issues, but I still feel like none of them actually fix the tone. They want to take certain aspects of the story seriously to mitigate any kind of negative audience response, but it just muddies the waters and destroys the satire and the message of the story. And this especially hurts my heart because one of the composers for Heathers also worked on one of my favorite musicals ever, Bat Boy, and they somehow nailed the balancing act of tone for that one, but completely failed with this one. But I'll leave off on a good note. At the very least, Heathers didn't update the time period for it to take place during modern times. I fucking hate it when musicals do that. So good job, Heathers. You did at least one thing right. Before I get into what I think is my most controversial opinion, I'm gonna do some rapid fire speed rounds of musicals that everyone seems to love, but I hate. Let's go. All jukebox musicals suck. Yes, even Mamma Mia. This is coming from a huge ABBA fan. Why do I think this? Well, because I think it fails at the two main things musicals are supposed to do: tell a decent story and have cohesive music. Because all the music is pre-written without the intention of ever being part of a musical, jukebox musicals take a bunch of songs that, even if written by the same person or band, don't work together and instead have to be force-fed into a barely coherent and often contrived story. I also just think it's such a lazy way to make a musical. Like, oh, you couldn't think of any of your own music? Cool. Mean Girls the musical sucks. Honestly, I don't have too much beef with this one. I just think the changes they made to the story don't really work with the original message of the film. I think all the music is super generic and the lyrics are some of the worst I've ever heard. And yeah, I've heard the counter argument that the lyrics are actually bad on purpose because all the characters are high schoolers and high schoolers aren't the best lyricists, but that is such a dumbass argument. Like, could you imagine if that excuse was used in every musical? Well, of course the lyrics for Waitress suck. Do you really think a working class woman would be able to come up with poetry on the fly? Duh, the lyrics for Les Mis are awful. Do you think a bunch of people fighting the revolution care about eloquence? Of course the lyrics for Sweeney Todd are bad. Do you think a Victorian murderer cares about verse? Like, it's such a bad excuse. Honestly, I hate the fans more than I hate the musical at this point. Grease sucks. The music is fine, but the story is hot garbage, and the moral is you should change everything about yourself in order to be with a man and to get people to stop making fun of you. And don't even start. I already heard the shitty counter argument of, no, Sandy changed because she wanted to, and Danny changes for Sandy too. And to that I have to say, no, Sandy was clearly peer pressured to present a certain way even though she didn't want to, and Danny only thought about changing for Sandy until he saw that she changed for him and went like, oh sick, I don't have to change anything about myself anymore, hooray! And then we're supposed to think that's super sweet and romantic? Ick. I first saw this musical at like 7 years old, and even as a young child, I thought this ending was bullshit. Bad musical. The Addams Family musical sucks. I absolutely adore the Addams Family franchise, specifically the 90s movies, but I also have major love for the 60s sitcom and the original newspaper serial. So you'd think this musical would be a slam dunk for me, but it just completely gets everything wrong about what the Addams Family is all about. They're weird and off-putting, but the joke is supposed to be that they're completely oblivious to this. They do find normal things frightening and upsetting, but they're never rude to other people about it. And most of all, they all love each other unconditionally. But the musical completely rakes all these aspects through the mud to have a storyline that centers around the family being prejudiced against Wednesday's new vanilla boy toy, and to make Morticia and Gomez have marital problems. Excuse me? Morticia and Gomez having marital problems? In your dreams. Horrible musical, and the music is mid too. Rent sucks. I feel like this opinion would have been more controversial a few years ago, but there's since been a re-examining of this musical that I think has gotten more people on my side. The whole thing just feels so completely tone deaf. Like, this is supposedly the story of a bunch of impoverished LGBT POC during the AIDS epidemic, and yet it mostly focuses on how horrible and unlikable all of them are, and how they aren't actually as impoverished as they seem and are actually all pretty privileged, but just masquerading as poor. And then on top of that, the only trans character dies of AIDS, while the straight girl with AIDS gets to live because she's brought back to life with the power of music and heterosexual love or whatever. And then to bring us home, this whole musical was written by a privileged, straight, white, cis man who decided to play poor for a year in New York or something, and that's what inspired him to write this musical. And if you want more information and a deeper analysis, I recommend checking out Lindsay Ellis's deep dive on it. Look, I think the composer's intentions were good, but Rent just ain't it. And the music and lyrics are trash. Parade sucks. Yeah, I know this one is hailed as one of the best musicals of all time, but the whole thing just strikes me as so distasteful. So if you're unaware, Parade is a musical about the life of a real-life Jewish man who was framed for rape and murder and lynched for it. And they made the story of him being hate crimed into a musical. Do you see where I'm coming from? It's not like I don't think musicals can't handle dark subject matter or biographies. After all, Fun Home, based on Alison Bechdel's autobiography, is one of my favorites. However, Parade in particular just feels so icky to me, especially when there's this whole upbeat dance number about a guy making up testimony to frame him. It literally made me feel nauseous listening to it. And maybe that was the point, but it didn't feel like it. It just felt horribly tone deaf. And yes, I'm aware a Jewish man also composed this musical, but I don't think that makes it any better. Hamilton sucks. Okay, wait, no, shh. Listen, I don't actually think this is a bad musical. I do think it's a good musical. I just think there's a certain aspect about it that kind of ruins the whole show for me. And that's the fact that this whole show is 100% just United States propaganda. It sugarcoats the hell out of the founding fathers and makes them all seem like these wonderful progressives when they really weren't. They were all terrible people, actually. Like, this show convinced so many people that Hamilton and George Washington didn't own slaves, but guys, ooh, they did. In fact, George was known for treating his slaves quite terribly and even spent a significant portion of his life trying to track down this one runaway woman just so he could catch her and punish her for daring to defy him. Not to mention how he exploited the natives to win the revolution, only to backstab and genocide them all later. Where was the rap ballad about that? Also, I just think Lin should stop casting himself in shit. The man is so talented in so many ways, but his performing, it could use some work. And last, Hadestown sucks. I just think it's generic and boring. Sorry. This one has gotten me into so much hot water before, so I knew I had to mention it in this video, and this opinion is by far the one I've gotten the most pushback on. I don't think I've ever met any musical theater fans who actually agree with me on this one. And before you ask, yes, I will be discussing the film, but let's talk about the original stage show first. So what do I not like about it? Honestly, I think it would be easier to list the things I don't have a problem with. I like that the people in the Emerald City wear green tinted glasses. And I think that's about it. Okay, to be honest, I have so many issues with this show that I think it'll be easiest to just go through it beat by beat and stop when I have notes. The whole opening sequence, Elphaba's backstory, and the song No One Mourns the Wicked, I have no problems with. I think it's a great way to open this story. What I have a problem with, though, is that Elphaba's dad is introduced as a character here and then proceeds to be completely irrelevant until he dies and Nessa inherits his title. I wish they did more with him. My next big issue is with Madame Morrible, and it's less about her and more about the tone because I have a similar note about the wizard's character, but at the end of the day, this whole show is an allegory for fascism, and by making the two biggest fascists in the show be simultaneously the source of most of its comedic relief, I think it kind of undercuts the message a bit. She's just also so overtly dismissive and rude to Elphaba straight off the bat until she realizes that she's powerful, and it makes Elphaba look stupid for immediately trusting her. But it does prompt Elphaba to sing the song The Wizard and I. And I just don't really like this song. I honestly think the orchestra is kind of lacking in this musical, which is a big part of why I don't like most of the songs. They kind of give MIDI file. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a big fan of Adina's voice. No justification here, it just is my preference. But moving on, the next big issue I have with the show is how they handle Dr. Dillamond and the persecution of the animals in Oz. Once again, this is an allegory for fascism and how those in power will point to a group of people to blame all their problems on. And this is my first problem with it. The reason why fascists choose a scapegoat is to distract from their shortcomings. But what's the issue? Because as far as I can tell, everyone loves the wizard and has no problems with him, and the animals aren't challenging him or the status quo in any way. The wizard already has absolute power and the love of his entire kingdom. Why would he need to throw anyone under the bus? For what reason? But if we ignore this plot hole, there are still other issues I have with the persecution of the animals, and that's the fact that it sets up Elphaba's whole reason for becoming a traitor to the state, but it also simultaneously is so irrelevant to the plot. Like, she supposedly super cares about Dr. Dillamond, but when he's fucking kidnapped by the state right in front of her eyes, she doesn't really do much about it, and then goes on to sing about how much she loves Fiero, and then proceeds to basically forget all about the state-sanctioned hate crime she just witnessed. And then later in the show, when she finds Dr. Dillamond, who has been tortured to the point that he can no longer speak, she's horrified, but then proceeds to leave him behind, and we literally never see him in the show again. In fact, Elphaba does very little to actually help or liberate the animals in any way. You know, the whole reason she decided to become a terrorist. Really, this whole show's fascism allegory is more of a backdressing for Elphaba's interpersonal drama, and I think that is just poor taste. Like, looking at something like Cabaret in comparison, the rising fascism and the interpersonal drama is perfectly weaved together to make a really powerful message. But by the end of Wicked, Elphaba did literally nothing and pats herself on the back for it while running off with her scarecrow boyfriend. Like, one of the biggest whiplash moments in the show has got to be when they sing Something Bad about how scared the animals are about being disappeared, and then it's immediately followed by the party song Dancing Through Life. And I know some people are gonna be like, that was actually done on purpose to show how people often dismiss the idea of fascists coming into power because it's easier to ignore it. And sure, that may have been the intent, but I feel like that intent is a little undercut by the fact that this entire show is an example of people ignoring fascism to focus on more fun things. And you know what? Speaking on Dancing Through Life, I hate this song. It wants so bad to be a fun, upbeat song, but the music just makes it sound like a MIDI file moving through jello. It gives me the ick tremendously. But moving on, my next biggest issue is with the song Wonderful. Once again, for reasons I've touched on. The wizard is supposed to be fucking Hitler. He's literally kidnapping and torturing sentient animals just for shits and giggles, I guess, but they're playing him like he's just this silly little guy who doesn't know any better. What am I supposed to feel right now? And then the most baffling thing is when Elphaba asks the wizard to release the flying monkeys, he just does it, but this causes so many more issues with the plot. Why is he bothering imprisoning the animals if he's willing to just hand them over so easily? What was the point of all of this? And if all it takes for the wizard to release the animals is Elphaba asking him to do it, why doesn't she just ask him to release all of them? If he's literally so incompetent that he doesn't even know why he's doing all of this, what is literally the point of any of it? And the fascism allegory is once again undercut and swept to the side so we can instead dedicate far too much time on the dumbass Fiyero, Glinda, Elphaba love triangle. And Glinda sings the reprise of I'm Not That Girl. I fucking hate this song, both the original and the reprise. I don't give a flying fuck about fuckboy Fiyero or Elphaba's image issues or how she puts all her self-worth on being liked by a boy. And maybe I wouldn't be pissed off by this plot element so much if, one, they spent any time trying to show us a realistic reason why Elphaba would give one single shit about Fiyero. They literally interact like a total of 3 times. And 2, if they didn't brush the whole fascism thing to the side to waste time on it. But anyway, Elphaba and Fiyero go on to sing the worst fucking love song I've ever heard in my life. It's so cripplingly 90s in the worst way possible and sounds so terribly out of place among the other songs. Not to mention how little I fucking care about their relationship. But the next scene is Elphaba going to her sister because Madame Morrible fucking murdered her, and now it's time to talk about tone. This musical has a serious tone issue. Yes, I get Nessa being crushed to death by a house is inherently ridiculous, but this was Elphaba's sister. She sucks for sure, but all we've been shown up until now is how much Elphaba cares about her and would literally die for her. But instead of showing Elphaba displaying any ounce of grief over losing her one remaining relative to murder of all things, we instead get a silly slapstick fight scene between her and Glinda. And then when Fiyero shows up to save her and is literally beaten to death and crucified for it, this is also somehow played for laughs. And then it's followed by the song No Good Deed, which is a very serious song. The whiplash is insane. What am I supposed to be feeling? What reaction are we trying to get from the audience? This honestly pisses me off so much because how are you gonna parade around and pat yourself on the back for making a show about fascism and then refuse to take your show seriously? And this isn't me saying this show can't have any comedy. I think this show needs comedy to lampshade itself a bit because it is a silly premise to take The Wizard of Oz and make it about fascism, but this show also needs to know when to take itself seriously in order to drive their point home. And I think it does do this right sometimes. I think the song No One Mourns the Wicked, Thank Goodness, and March of the Witch Hunters balance this tone really well. But it seems like the one I've mentioned previously that make up the majority of the show and completely destroy its message. And going back to the song No Good Deed just for a moment, I actually do like this song, except for how much emphasis is put on the loss of Fiyero. That really ruins the song for me. Once again, why the fuck are we putting so much emphasis on this boring ass white boy, who was whitewashed for the musical by the way, as Elphaba's final straw into becoming the Wicked Witch? You'd think it'd be her sister being murdered or her best friend turning her back on her, not the death of some bitch she talked to twice. Anyway, my last problem with this musical story is the ending. I don't have a problem with the premise of the song for good, but I do think it's the weakest song in terms of lyrics. You really couldn't think of anything else to rhyme with good other than wood. Anyway, here are my real problems with the ending. Number 1 is the tone again. Once again, I know it's silly how Elphaba dies, but it would have been a lot more impactful if it wasn't played for laughs. Same with the reveal that Elphaba is the wizard's daughter. This moment elicits a laugh from the audience and it shouldn't. I also hate how rushed and unearned the ending feels. Glinda is just able to take control and fix everything with zero resistance or drawbacks. Once again, what was the point of all of that if the fix was so easy? My last problem with the ending is the reveals. The reveal that Fiyero is the Scarecrow. Fucking hate it. The Scarecrow was always my favorite from the book. How dare you imply he's a mediocre white boy? And the second reveal that Elphaba is alive. Once again, I think the ending would have been much more impactful if it took itself more seriously and if it was left ambiguous if Elphaba faked her death or not. That last harmony between Elphaba and Glinda in the finale would have been such a tearjerker if we were left in the dark about whether it's just the memory of Elphaba singing or if it's really her and she's still alive out there somewhere. But this musical is incapable of leaving any kind of real impact, so we're explicitly told that Elphaba is still alive and just leaving her life's work behind to her best friend, who she's also leaving to believe that she's dead. Kind of a dick move. Okay, but the last thing I want to critique about the stage musical is the pacing. This is a 2.5 hour long show, and it somehow moves at light speed. And I get it, there's a lot of story to get through and only 2 hours to do it. But the unfortunate drawback of this is that we're never allowed to sit with anything, and it once again makes the story overall less impactful. But anyway, if we spent less time fawning over Fuckboy Fiyero, we'd have more time to actually let the fascism allegory sink in. Overall, my critiques of this show boil down to pacing, tone, mid-music, and not putting nearly as much weight on the whole fascism thing as they should. And this is why I feel like Wicked is highly overrated. I was literally so pissed off when I was watching this musical for the first time. I could not, and still cannot, fathom why this musical became so popular. My best guess is that it's beloved by people who want to claim to be woke without wanting to challenge any of their currently held beliefs. Wicked is for people who want to look like they care about the rise of fascism, and Cabaret is for people who actually care about the rise of fascism. Okay, but in seriousness, I don't legitimately think you're a bad person if you like this musical. That would be a crazy claim to make. But I really am curious about why you like this musical if you do, because I honestly find it quite lazy and insulting. Okay, but now let's discuss my thoughts on the movie adaptation. I feel like I'm going to be flayed alive for this one, but I think the movie is leagues better than the stage show. At least the first one. Thoughts on Wicked for Good later. As for the first claim, I think it fixed a lot of my problems with the tone and pacing. I think it takes itself more seriously when it needs to, and obviously the 2.5 hour runtime for the first act allows more room for the story to breathe. I did feel like Ariana's vocals were lacking as Glinda. She clearly struggles trying to sing in a more traditional way, so I do unfortunately prefer Charlie Kirk sympathizer Kristen Chenoweth in terms of vocals. But I thought Ariana did great when it came to acting. As for Cynthia, she completely annihilated Adina in every way. Cynthia made me love the song The Wizard and I when I felt completely neutral on it before. That last note, literal chills. I also really enjoyed Jonathan Bailey as Fiyero, which is really saying something because I fucking hate Fiyero. And amazingly, I actually love the movie version of Dancing Through Life. In fact, I enjoy the film score far more than the original Broadway cast recording, because it sounds like real music rather than a MIDI file. I will say though, the soundtrack does have pitch correcting that does sound pretty awful at some points, and that really pisses me off because there was literally no reason to add pitch correction to any of the vocals. But the movie itself sounds great. But now it's time to talk about Wicked for Good. So I definitely have more critiques for this one, but still they are far less than the original stage show. First critique is that the little girl Glinda flashback scene is so unnecessary. It literally adds nothing that we didn't already know, and it was cringe. Second is Madame Morrible's singing. Listen, I hate to critique Michelle Yeoh, but her singing was tolerable in the first film, but somehow got worse. Like, I don't know how it's possible, but she got way worse. And then there was the CGI horror monstrosity that was the de-aged Jeff Goldblum. I heard people talking about how bad it was, so I was expecting it to be bad, but Holy Mother of God, nothing could have prepared me for how despicable it really was. Why did they do that? And the worst part is, they didn't even need to. In this one moment, I think the stage show did it better when they revealed the wizard is Elphaba's dad by just replaying the section of No Good Deed with the elixir salesman. That was far more effective. We didn't need the CGI flashback. Quit it with the flashbacks. But other than those things, I think the movie fixed a lot of my issues with the tone and pacing of the stage show. But it also left in a lot of my issues with the original show. For example, there still isn't a reason for the wizard and Madame Morrible to want to demonize and enslave the animals or bring about fascism. But I will say, at the very least, they added more scenes that actually show Elphaba doing work to liberate the animals, so that was a much needed and appreciated addition. And while I do love the new characterization of Madame Morrible overall in the film, they did this weird slapstick moment with her where she like face planted into cake that just really didn't work for me, especially so with her new characterization. And then there's the lion. This is the same in both the stage show and the movie, but the reason why he doesn't like Elphaba is because she helped him escape as a baby, and I guess that led to him being a coward. And this is just so stupid because it's such a weak motivation, and because there was a much better reason sitting right in front of our faces the writers could have used instead. Like, wouldn't it be so much better if the lion hated Elphaba, not for helping him escape, but because she abandoned him? Like, think about it. He could have been like, oh yeah, at first I was really thankful that she helps me escape, but then she took me to the deep, dark forest and left me there. I was just a cub. I was defenseless and alone and terrified, and I'm still terrified. If she hadn't abandoned me, I wouldn't be such a coward today. That would be such a valid reason to hate Elphaba, and it would help add on to Elphaba's struggle with thinking about if what she's doing is really the right way to go about things. And then there's still issues with problems being resolved too easily. Like when Elphaba asks for the animals to be released, the wizard just does it. But then Elphaba discovers the other caged animals, and then the wizard is like, well, some of them have to stay caged. But once again, doesn't give a reason why. That stupid Elphaba and Glinda fight scene is still here, and honestly, after rewatching, I think the real reason I hate the scene, other than tone, is the fact that they're fighting over Fiyero, of all things. Like, don't both of you have bigger issues right now? Get a grip. And speaking of Fiyero, they done chopped him good. He looks like shit. Why does he look like that? And I think my biggest movie original gripe is the change to the ending, actually. In the original stage show, the reason Elphaba fakes her death and runs away is because she realizes if she stays and tries to fight, the wizard will just keep spinning it for propaganda. But if she hands over power to Glinda, Glinda will be able to fix everything because everyone loves her. But it will still take years of work to undo all the harm the wizards caused. But in the movie, Glinda is just able to erase 100% of the propaganda in a matter of seconds. No one has issues with animals anymore just because she's like, don't worry, guys, the animals are actually chill and our friends. But that completely removes the need for Elphaba to leave. If these people are deprogrammed so easily, what's stopping Glinda from just telling everyone that Elphaba is just cool now and no need for everyone to freak out? They even address this in the movie. Elphaba says Glinda can't try to clear her name or it will hurt the cause. But clearly not. The people of Oz are apparently decultified super easy. Okay, and my last opinion is super not valid, and I know this, but I'm gonna share it anyway. So in the original Oz books, it's established that no one can leave Oz because it's surrounded by an impassable desert. And the reason the desert is impassable is because if you touch the sand, you die. And you don't just drop dead either. You literally dissolve into sand and become a part of the desert. Absolutely horrific, right? They call it the Deadly Desert for a reason. But in the Wicked movie, the animals, and later Elphaba and Fiyero, all walk on the sand, and nothing happens to them. They're fine. It's such bullshit. I was tweaking out in the theater for real. But let me just pause here and reiterate that I know this is an invalid criticism because the Wicked musical exists in its own universe separate from the Oz books. While it may have been established in the books that the desert is deadly, that same lore obviously didn't carry over to the musical. But I'm still gonna be mad about it because why the hell would you bother including the desert if you were going to remove the deadly aspect? The whole point of the desert, narratively, is so that it isn't super easy to leave Oz. It's one of the main reasons stopping Dorothy from just walking home. And just think of how much more harrowing everything would have felt if the animals couldn't just flee Oz, if they were trapped and so desperate to get out that they risked building an underground tunnel without even knowing if it would work, and if they'd die or not. Now that's a way to up the stakes. Okay, but my final consensus is that while it doesn't fix all the story issues, and in fact creates its own new ones. The Wicked movies are far better than the original stage play, but at the end of it all, I still find the whole show severely overrated. There are so many plot issues and tone issues and pacing issues that make the show feel so unpolished, and it makes me wonder how it even managed to get on Broadway, let alone become so popular. My best guess is that people love the show for the music, but other than a few gems, I thought that was pretty mid too. The final thoughts? I still think Wicked is super overrated. And there you have it. Those are my most controversial musical opinions. What are your thoughts? Did I say anything that really ticked you off? Anything you agree with? Anything you want to fight me over? What are some of your own controversial musical opinions? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, if you subscribe, you too can avoid taking any accountability for your terrible opinions. But if you're actually a good person and like taking accountability for your shitty opinions, don't even worry about it. Bye.